And honestly, it's not all bad. I'll start with the good because there are some good things that the Raptors have going for them, though not many. First of which, Pascal Siakam. He's been playing like an absolute he's playing like an all-star, an absolute lock for all NBA if he keeps this up. And again, despite even him going down with injury, he just seems to not, he hasn't lost that step. He's continued his great play. He's literally been the brightest spot for the Raptors this season.
He's at that next level phase of, when that all-star player takes the next step forward into solidifying himself as a top. He's definitely at least top 15 this season. There's even a discussion now within Toronto circles of, is he better than Chris Bosh was? I would say, in terms of Toronto Chris Bosh, I would say Pascal Siakam is better. Now, if we want to talk about peak Miami Chris Bosh, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Because Eric Spoelstra really got a lot out of Chris Bosh that Toronto wasn't able to. But I think, we're talking about like one of the top 5 best players in Raptors history at this point with Pascal Siakam and how he's currently playing.
Yeah, and he's been great. I mean, both ends of the floor, he's been super consistent for the team. So Pascal has been awesome this season. The second bright spot for the Raptors has been OG Anunoby, who seems to have taken a step forward. He's expanded his offensive game, and over time, especially when Pascal was out, you saw how OG was able to, increase his offensive game and really helped the Raptors in that period of time when we were like, holy shit, Pascal's out, what are we supposed to do now? But OG stepped up. Not only is he still playing at an all-defensive level on that side of the floor, but offensively, you can tell he's more confident driving. He's no longer just settling for three-point shots. He's utilizing his frame. He's adding things like the spin move to his repertoire. So OG has been solid. And actually, OG missed a few games himself these over the last few weeks. And the Raptors' defense has completely plummeted without him. So that just shows how valuable he is. And again, even with just Pascal, he can't do it by himself. More on that later. But OG has been a great bright spot for the team. And then not to mention, back to stats, they're first in turnovers. They have the lowest turnover rate in the league, so they don't really turn the ball over. They're fifth in offensive rebounds. So last season, the Raptors were also a top offensive rebounding team. So they're still keeping that up. So they don't turn the ball over. They still crash the glass and get their second chance opportunities. But that's basically where the good of this team kind of stops. And it's becoming more and more apparent that the negatives are far outweighing the positives with this team. And getting into some of the negatives or the bad of this team, first and foremost, I mean, I can just end it right here. They lost to the Orlando Magic twice in a row.
To be fair, Orlando's been on what? As of right now, I think they're on like a 6-game winning streak or something.
Are they trying to win?
They've semi-turned around their season. There's no way that they're not going to tank by the end of the season, but they have solidified themselves and their future in terms of what it could possibly look like. And listen, like Bol, Paolo, Franz Wagner is like amazing, bro. That guy is really good.
What happened to Mo?
And again, it's also coincided with Markelle Fultz coming back. He's a big part of their team, even though he doesn't necessarily put up the stat sheet production that you would expect from a number 1 pick. But he's been very important for the team. So their team is playing really well. It's just, it also coincided with us starting their winning streak.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. They beat a few teams before us. They beat like the Clippers and another team before us as well. But that's not even the point. The Orlando Magic are not trying to win games. They're not trying to win games. If you can name, I don't know, maybe 8 Orlando Magic players, I'll give you a ton of credit. Because let's be honest, that's not what their aim is. Yes, they're accumulating some young talent. They have some good players there. But that's not, like, the fact that the Raptors lost to a team like that, to me,
Twice
in a row, and one of them you got blown out. That's just inexcusable. But why did they lose those games? Well, a big reason is because they can't shoot for their life right now. And in previous years the Raptors were a bad shooting team, a poor shooting team, but they made up for it in other areas. Their defense, their hustle, their rebounding, and that made up for it. But this season they're not getting those positives, and their shooting is just even worse. They're 29th in 3-point percentage and 28th in field goal percentage. That's just bad.
They're also average on free throw percentage as well, which means they're not hitting their free throws at a high enough rate.
Despite them being top, I think they're top 10 in attempts. So they're getting to the line. They're just not making them. So that's even worse.
It's funny because when we think about the beginning of the season, the Raptors were shooting amazing. And all of us realists out there were like, wait for the averages to average out.
Yeah.
And it's averaged out very hard.
Yeah, I think it just went right past the average and went right down. Like it's not been pretty, and a lot of that has to do with guys like their actual main shooters, like Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr., really struggling this season. Like
OG has also struggled. Now, granted, he has that hand injury that has been affecting his shooting, but again, that doesn't help.
But OG's still shooting at least 35%. At least he's shooting league average. Guys like Fred VanVleet is shooting like 28%, like 20 some, I think 22. Like they're shooting Russell Westbrook level right now, and that is when no player in this era wants to be at right now. You know, Gary Trent Jr., you know, he's on and off, but he's also been struggling with his jump shot. Fred's just looks broken. Like it's not the same. He's missing wide open looks. And those two guys are your main two guards. And then you factor in that a second-year player in Scotty Barnes has struggled. He's really hit the sophomore slump where things aren't coming as easily. Teams are game planning for him. And I also think he is hampered a little bit. I think the injury is there. But again, if, Zishan pointed this to me earlier, he's still playing. So if you're playing, if you're out there, if you're good enough to play, then you got to still perform.
And again, the Raptors medical staff are notoriously conservative with the amount that they let.
Oh yeah, we invented load management. Like,
exactly.
Like we invented that.
Like
shit.
any little injury, the Raptors staff seems to have always like pulled out a player.
Yeah.
So if they're letting Scotty Barnes go with this, that means it's not big enough for it to be an issue to honestly complain about.
Yeah, and I think again we always forget Scotty had a great year last year, but he is a second-year player, and he is going to eventually hit walls. It's up to the player to overcome those things. And right now, that's not what he's doing. He's struggling. He's on and off. There are moments when we see the old Scotty Barnes come back, but again, it's hit or miss depending on the game. And the fact that those three guys that I just named are all starters is very telling and very concerning.
Well, Gary Trent Jr. was a starter, but he's basically a sixth man now. So
yeah, like again,
key players.
Like listen, like these are 2-3 top guys that we have on the team. And then you factor in, and we brought up the fact that Scotty might be banged up, might not be, but the Raptors, them as a whole, have had so many injuries this season. And I'm not making any excuses. You play with what you got. But this year, the injury gods have really affected the Raptors.
I think it's been this way for a while, to be honest. It's been like this for a number of seasons. It's just we didn't have the players that were playing struggling as hard as we do now.
Yeah, that's fair. But like, let's be honest with you, the numbers don't lie. The Raptors have the fourth most injured players throughout the season so far. Sixth most games lost to injuries. So Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. have missed about 20% of the season each. Pascal Siakam missed about a third. Precious Achiuwa has missed nearly 2/3 of the season. And their top free agent signing, Otto Porter, has missed literally like 3/4 of the season so far.
Again, that's kind of expected.
I mean, it's kind of to be expected with Otto Porter, but like, let's be honest, the Raptors have used 17 different starting lineups, and they've just played over 30. This is like game like 31, something like that, and like that's telling, man. That's telling for the fact that the Raptors they've had to work with so little, and a lot of that comes back down to the fact that this Raptor team, although on paper we expected some internal growth, we expected the team to be better, there just isn't really guard depth that Nick Nurse really trusts on the court. Like Malachi Flynn, recently he's been picking it up, but even Delano Banton, Jeff Doughton, those guys aren't really guys that Nick Nurse is going to trust on a nightly basis. And you pair that with the fact that your starting guards are struggling, it basically it doesn't help that situation.
Half your team is missing, basically.
Pretty much. And, the reality is that that has been a big hole the Raptors haven't really addressed over the last couple of seasons.
I mean, to be fair, they've tried addressing it with Malachi Flynn, Delano Banton. I like Jeff Doughton, but I mean he's like a borderline NBA player, at least from what we've seen from him. He's a two-way guy right now. Like he's on. And so the problem becomes, again, Malachi Flynn. I think he's taken a step forward in terms of his offense. He's definitely much more better on that end of the floor. The problem is his defense is still, like, he's never going to be a great defender. And with a guy like Fred VanVleet, for example, who's not the fastest guy, he's pretty short on an NBA level, his hands are what separates him defensively and his strength. Malachi Flynn has neither of those things, unfortunately. So it becomes very hard for Nick Nurse to trust Malachi Flynn, especially when he doesn't hit his shots in a game.
Yeah, no, it's true. And again, I've been a big supporter of Malachi Flynn. I wanted to see him have success, but there's some instances, moments where you're just not a good fit for the team, and I just don't think he's a player that A, Nick Nurse trusts enough, and B, fits the type of defensive schemes that the Raptors are trying to run. And Delano Banton, again, he's shown flashes of being a good player. Obviously, being a Toronto-born draft pick is always great, but he still needs refinement. He still needs to develop, and he's just not there yet. So they don't have really a lot of guard depth. Speaking of younger players, they're relying on a rookie center in Christian Koloko to play big minutes right off the bat. Like, none of us when we drafted Christian Koloko really expected him to be a rotation contributor right away. You know, we all expected him to, to go to the G League, maybe, do well there, have some success there, get some confidence, and then maybe next season, maybe near the end of the season, maybe call him up. But Nick Nurse has literally been starting him half the games, like, because they needed a spark, they needed a combination, or they just literally had nobody else. And that, to me, has been a big factor, is the fact that we have bigs, but again, Nick Nurse doesn't really trust them, or they don't fit the team. They don't play the way Nick Nurse wants them to. And
well, when we go down the list, like Christian Koloko, again, credit to him. He's been better than what we thought he would be.
Oh, yeah.
But he's just not that player yet.
He's
when
a
we
rookie.
look at our center depth, you have your Kem Birch, who's always injured.
Even when he's not. I mean, he doesn't really give you much on the offensive end. Defensively, he's not really as effective in certain matchups. Like, I like Kem Birch, but again, like, there isn't really much he can really provide you.
And last year we were playing Precious, who is currently injured.
Yeah.
So
And even Precious has his limitations. He's undersized. He's prone to making offensive mistakes. I mean, Precious is a young player himself. So the Raptors, they not only do they not have the guards that we thought they would have, the big men have not been there as well. And I don't consider Chris Boucher a big man anymore, because you really can't play him against centers. Defensively, you can't play him against centers. You really can't play him against bigger power forwards. So Chris Boucher has now just become a wing player, and he can't shoot. So that's been a problem. I like Thaddeus Young just being the veteran presence, but again, Thad isn't even looking to score.
And again, bro, if you're relying on Thad Young at this point, it's an issue.
He's 36 years old, man. He's too old for this crap. But again, Thad has been a bright spot as well for the team. And so the fact of the matter is that the roster is pretty imbalanced. They have too many players and roster spots that either, again, like I mentioned, Nick Nurse doesn't trust them, or they're just not good enough, or they don't play the way the Raptors want to warrant a consistent rotational spot. And that leads into how the Raptors have played recently.
Well, I would say one more thing is also the starts, whether it's at the start of the game or during the third quarter.
Yeah.
The starts coming out of the locker room have been bad. I think, unfortunately, that points to a coaching issue. Like, when you can't get off to a good start, I think that's a clear telltale sign that there's some sort of imbalance in terms of the game plan and what's actually going on, or, the coaches, unfortunately, are just not doing a great job. Well, I don't want to be a Nick Nurse blamer, but if we're passing the blame around, the coach has also got to have some of the blame.
Oh, no. He definitely has some blame to play in this as well. I mean, again, that was the point I was going to bring up as well, was the fact that in this last recent stretch, either they've had too many third quarter collapses, or they've had really poor starts. And I think some of that can be attributed to the chemistry being off, because, again, injuries, Nurse has been just trying different lineup combinations, and no guys have really been able to get a feel for each other. That could play in a factor, but it's up to a head coach, Nick Nurse, to manage that and to really, put some more trust into guys. I think, there are moments where, yes, you're going to have to live with, a Delano Banton's mistakes or Malachi Flynn's mistakes in order to allow them to grow. And that's the fine line that the Raptors are walking on right now, where they want to develop players, but they still want to win. And that's a very, very fine line. It's great when it works, but it's when it doesn't work, you end up in situations like the Raptors are currently in right now. So where do the Raptors go from here? Like, what are some potential solutions to the Raptors' problems? And to be honest with you, there really isn't many solutions that I could think of beyond got to make a big trade. Got to make a big trade. You got to balance out this roster. And I think at this point, The Raptors, in my opinion, have been too conservative. I know Masai Ujiri's not a mortgage the future kind of guy. Bobby Webster neither the same way. But I think it's time to stop worrying about the future and worrying about the now. Like, we were talking about a Pascal Siakam, an OG Anunoby. These guys are entering the primes of their careers. And Pascal is going to be a free agent after the 2024 season. So we have to convince him to re-sign with us. It's not the situation like it was before, where Pascal was an up-and-comer and we were able to re-sign him and extend him on his rookie deal. He's going to be a bona fide superstar. A lot of teams are going to be interested in him. So now we have to prove to them, hey, we can build around you. We want to keep you around. So I think make first round picks available. Raptors have all their picks. Make a expiring deal, maybe like a Gary Trent Jr. available for a trade. And again, I would say anyone not named Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and maybe OG Anunoby, depending on the conversation, is up for a conversation. I just think at this point, you have to make a move. Either you try to go for the center of the future, you get the guy who's going to be a part of your core going forward, or get another guard who Nick Nurse can truly trust and rely on. At this point, we've gone too long without either of those positions. I know the 6'9" movement is great, and it's a nice tool to have in your repertoire, but it can't be the only thing that defines you. You have to have other elements. You have to have other layers, and it's high time the Raptors start addressing those positions and maybe get some shooting, although they've tried to address those issues, with an Otto Porter and stuff, but it just hasn't worked out. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now, and I'd even say trade away some of the wasted players. We've kind of mentioned them. The redundant players, the guys we don't need, like the Malachi Flynns, the Kem Birches. And I'd even argue I might be time to move off of Chris Boucher because we need to get, maybe just for salary purposes, just because we need to get more guys who we can consistently rely on in the rotation. And, yeah, who those players would be, I was having a tough time finding potential trades that I think would work. But here are some names that I think the Raptors could target. Miles Turner has been a guy who we brought up on the show a bunch of times. He's definitely a good name. I just don't know how much the Pacers are going to be willing to let him go.
Especially now that he's playing pretty well with their core.
Yeah, he's established himself as a big part of his core. The only reason why it's the Pacers trading him is maybe because they don't want to pay him because he's on an expiring deal this season. But Miles Turner is definitely an interesting one. Bring back a familiar face in Jakob Poeltl from the Spurs. Now that's been the most talked about rumor. But again, Jakob Poeltl, he has a ceiling. We drafted him. We know what he's about. But credit to him. He's developed himself very nicely in San Antonio. But again, he's on an expiring deal, so you're going to have to pay Jakob next year. Maybe going after a guy like Doug McDermott would help the shooting issues with the Raptors. But again, he's not really a guy for the defensive side of things. But maybe taking a risk and getting a shooter might help open up the offense a little bit more. And the fact that the Raptors have other defensive guys, they could make it work. Similar situation for a guy like Buddy Hield. Only difference being is Buddy Hield is a lot more expensive. But if you have Buddy Hield, take on Buddy Hield's deal, potentially also get a Miles Turner, it could work. Free up some space for the Pacers, give them some draft compensation. It might make the deal worth it for them. Another name would be John Collins. Now, I don't know how well this would work, considering the fact that he's not a center, but he's 6'9", he's super athletic, under team control for the next 4 years. I think he fits the Raptors' defensive schemes. I think the Raptors can make John Collins an even better defensive player. But again, I don't know how the fit will work. I don't know why the Hawks would make the trade. That's one of the things that is tough, but he's definitely an interesting one to keep an eye on. A guy who I really like and I think the Raptors should look into is Cole Anthony. I think he's a steady hand. He can be a solid backup point guard for the team. Again, it just really depends on what. And the Magic, the Orlando Magic have a lot of guards. They have a lot of point guards. They still have, again, Markelle Fultz, Jalen Suggs. Again, you can probably use Paolo Banchero, the pseudo point guard as well. So they have the guard depth right now. So they could maybe make a guy like Cole Anthony expendable, especially if the Raptors are willing to part with draft compensation. So he would be an option. Even picking up a guy like Terrence Ross again to help the shooting. Ross familiar with the organization. They know him. They know what he can do. But again, Ross isn't really shooting that well this season, so depends. Another name would be Monty Morris. From the Wizards, he'd be another steady hand, someone who can stretch the floor. Could be a solid backup point guard for the team. Jordan Clarkson has been another big name that has been floating around out there. He's your typical bench gunner. The only thing that I'm worried about with Jordan Clarkson is he just going to be Gary Trent Jr. 2.0, where some nights he's hot, some nights he's cold?
Well, that's the issue with bench gunners.
Yeah, like it really, really depends. And another name from the Utah Jazz is Mike Conley, who, again, aging veteran point guard, but knows how to play, willing to win. He's shown he has the capability to defend. And it might be willing, if Utah be willing to part with his contract, if we're willing, and part with another asset if we're willing to take on Mike Conley's contract. So those are some of the names that I think the Raptors could do, but overall the message is clear. They need to make a big trade. Otherwise, they can just maybe get healthier and hope their fortunes turn back. I mean, over the last 6 games, in the 6-game losing streak, 4 of those losses have been losses that have been under 5 points. So the Raptors aren't losing close games. They just, maybe with some of the guys back, maybe they can start winning some of those matchups. But again, that's wishful thinking. But bottom line to me is that the top guys got to play better. Fred VanVleet got to play better. Gary Trent Jr. has got to play better. Scotty Barnes got to play better. Unless those guys step their game back up, or the Raptors make a big move, I just don't see this team, getting out of this honestly pretty dark situation that they're in.
Yeah, I mean, the Raptors, again, they're not in a great situation right now, but what you can at least say for the Raptors is that they have some building blocks moving forward. This isn't a make or break season for them. So in terms of teams that are struggling, I think the Raptors are pretty high on the list of those teams in terms of their lack of urgency, right? The Raptors are not in a terrible spot right now.